Ronald Reagan, President 40 of the United States of America. Profession, actor, governor, president. That was Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, number 40 in succession. My grandmother, whenever there were problems, my grandmother, whether they were little problems or big problems, my grandmother used to say, "Have a nice cup of tea." She was a stout woman of English descent. This is a commercial bottle of unsweetened tea. My grandmother had a nice blue willow set, blue willow china. She was very proud of that. And for an occasion of importance, if there was a tragedy or an event that we couldn't cope with as children, she would always say, "Sit down and have a nice cup of tea." That used to be in olden times an English mother's answer to almost everything. Have a nice cup of tea. Of course, I'm being a little flippant, a little facetious, because not everything in this world can be solved by having a cup of tea. But going through the Great Depression of 1929, as both my mother and my grandmother did, having a separation because my grandfather on my mother's side had cancer of the larynx, and he had a big hole right here in his throat. So he lived in the Pine Barrens about 30 miles away from the city of Trenton, presumably because my grandmother couldn't stand looking at that hole in my grandfather's throat. She was probably a stout woman from eating oyster crackers. These are almost pure starch. She would sit around all day and evening eating these. These are starchy biscuits or starchy crackers. They're made in the city of Trenton. A matter of fact, that's partly what their name is. Trenton oyster crackers. This is not a promotional. Trenton oyster crackers. They're usually for soup or clam chowder, oyster soup. I have to be careful or everything will go flying around. There's no breeze this morning, but it's slightly chilly. It must be about 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They're like little starchy crackers or little starchy balls of dough. They're dry and they crackle when you bite into them. They're supposed to float in your soup or your clam chowder. She would eat them plain. My grandmother would eat them plain. She was raised in the Episcopal Church, my grandmother, on my mother's side. But my aunts were Roman Catholic. My grandmother would also, when television came, around 1948, she would sit in front of the television eating these biscuits or crackers. Once again, I hope I'm not accused of product placement. That's why I altered the design on the package. They're made out of cheese. They're like cheese biscuits, cheese crackers, as they say in the United States. And she'd sit in front of the television, watching her favorite show. Just wanted to show you what they look like. They're little wafers of cheese. And they're salty. There's a cover of salt on them. And she'd sit there and eat them by the box in front of the television set and watch Groucho Marx and his show that he had on. Groucho Marx was one of her favorite characters. Like I was intimating, she grew up in the Great Depression of 1929. These are graham crackers, and often when she encouraged us to have tea, she would say, "Have a graham cracker." Whenever we had any problems. Whenever we had any problems, she would say, "Have a nice cup of tea." And a graham cracker. They're a little wafer. I don't really know how to describe the taste. My mother also would encourage us to have graham crackers. Allegedly, this backstory for graham crackers is that they prevent young men from having erections. This is a bottle of milk. When I was younger, milk came in a glass bottle, but this is plastic. And one of the family stories is the milk used to have cream on the top, and I had a great aunt who came over one time babysitting with us, and she shook the bottle of milk so hard that the lid flew off and the cream stuck to the kitchen ceiling. Yeah, the cream on the milk bottle. Remember, it was a glass bottle with a little cardboard top on it. And she shook it so hard, the cream flew up and hit the kitchen ceiling and stuck on the ceiling. Everybody thought that was so funny. And of course, being a kid, any event like that was considered humorous. And for children, back then, graham cracker in the milk was considered quite an event. I forgot how good it tasted. This is a bottle of blackstrap molasses. Both my grandmother and my mother, whenever we had minor problems, the kids, whether it be a cold, a sore throat, or just a mild melancholia, a mild depression, the blues, she'd give us a spoonful of blackstrap molasses. Both my grandmother on my mother's side and my mother. Apparently the tradition goes back a long way. My mother never did pick up the habit of oyster crackers. I guess she didn't like the oyster crackers as much as my grandmother did. What she did like were saltines. As kids, saltines are biscuits, unleavened, very much like matzahs for that matter, but they're more bland. They're not as flavorful as some matzahs are. They're flat bread, unleavened. My mother would always have saltines around the house. This was what we did when we were in the 1940s during war. That's another point I wanted to mention, that there were rationing during World War II. A lot of things were unavailable. Sugar was rationed. Coffee was rationed. Gasoline was rationed. Benzene, petrol was rationed. So people were very careful how they spent their money because many things were not available, like sugar, like gasoline, benzene, petrol. Just wasn't there. They had coupon books, but you had to be careful about using the coupons. This is marmalade. Orange marmalade. This was considered a really exciting treat. I mean, the kids would get really excited to open a jar of marmalade. (1940), during the Great World War II, and my father's favorite was peanut butter. Again, I altered the label, hoping not to violate any copyright laws. My father would sit for hours with a spoon and a piece of bread or a cracker, a saltine, and scoop the peanut butter right out of the jar, paste it onto the bread or the saltine by the hours. He'd sit there and eat it. The reason I bought this particular brand of peanut butter was because there was an all-night restaurant in Trenton. It was open all night, 24 hours. And its name was after the childhood character, brand name for the peanut butter. I'm very careful, try not to break any copyright laws, but many of them are vague and arbitrary, many of the copyright laws. And it's hard to tell you've all seen peanut butter, so it's no exciting deal for you. But my father would sit in front of the television set with his friend from down the street. The reason why we got the television, little postcard size screen, and I mean it, the screen was exactly the size of a postcard because I measured it myself. When I was young, I took a postcard and put it right in front of the screen, and the postcard covered the black and white screen. He would sit there with his friend, and they would put peanut butter. They would put peanut butter on crackers like that and watch the wrestling or the boxing on Saturday night. That's why we got the television. That's why we got the television. So he could watch boxing and wrestling on Saturday night. This is a curious book. It's called God Drives a Flying Saucer by R.L. Dion. I think I'm pronouncing the name right. God Drives a Flying Saucer.